Welcome, everyone. Let's just jump right into today's explainer because we are looking at a massive paradigm shift in how we approach professional development. I mean, we're talking about moving completely away from those rigid, top-down lectures we are all so used to and finally embracing the messy, shared struggle of actual on-the-ground practice. It's honestly a completely different way to think about how we grow in our careers.
So, let me ask you something. Think back for a second. When was the last time a formal professional development session actually transformed your teaching? If you're like most educators or professionals, the answer is probably, well, not recently, right? We've all sat in those huge auditoriums, staring at beautifully polished slides from a proclaimed expert, and we walk away thinking, okay, sure, that sounds great in theory, but how on earth does that actually work with my students or my clients? It's super frustrating, and that exact frustration is what we are addressing today.
Okay, let's dive right into this. There is an incredibly sharp contrast between traditional training and what we call communities of practice, or COPs. Traditional training, it focuses entirely on transmitting certainty. It's basically a fixed list of topics delivered to passive attendees, just trying to make sure the expert's knowledge somehow gets into your head. But communities of practice flip that completely on its head. They actually focus on uncertainty. They lean right into the shared, unedited realities of your daily practice with active participants who are literally just figuring it out together. Now, this shift certainly didn't happen overnight. It builds on decades of intellectual groundwork. The big thinkers who really pioneered this whole space are Lave and Étienne Wenger. Back in 1991, they introduced this concept of situated learning. They basically observed apprentices, like tailors and midwives, and proved that learning is actually a deeply social process. It's not just something happening in a classroom. By 1998, Wenger clearly defined the anatomy of communities of practice. And today, Étienne and Beverly Wenger Trainer continue to evolve this theory with highly practical frameworks like the value creation model. So this concept grew all the way from its anthropological roots straight into the practical strategies that we can use in our schools today. I have to say, I absolutely love this quote from Richard McDermott. Learning does not belong to individual persons, but to the various conversations of which they are a part. Just think about that for a second. It fundamentally reframes learning from this isolated event happening quietly inside our own heads to a vibrant, deeply social process. The knowledge literally lives in the connections and the conversations between practitioners. So what exactly is a community of practice? Well, it's formally defined as groups of people who share a concern or a passion for something they do and learn how to do it better as they interact regularly. The absolute key phrases here are interact regularly and do it better. So this isn't a one-off workshop. It's not a casual water cooler chat in the break room. A true COP requires sustained interaction over time and a genuine shared desire to actually improve your craft. So the crucial point here is understanding what separates a community of practice from just a simple networking group or a casual meeting. According to Wenger, there are three essential ingredients. First up, the domain. This is a shared interest or identity that brings you all together. Second, the community, meaning the actual relationships, the trust, and the mutual interaction between the members. And third, the practice, developing a shared repertoire of resources, tools, and shared experiences. You absolutely need all three of these for a community of practice to actually thrive. To really vividly illustrate what sharing that practice looks like in the real world, let me tell you this incredible story from a Wenger Trainer interview. So a master psychotherapist was speaking at this massive conference, but instead of giving a flawless, highly polished keynote showing how brilliant she was, she played an audio clip of a highly difficult client session. Then she played it again in slow motion and shared all of her raw, unedited uncertainty with the room. She admitted right there on stage, "I didn't know what to do here. I was worried I made a mistake." And wow, that vulnerability yielded so much richer learning for the audience than a perfect presentation ever could have. Why? Because she invited them into the shared struggle of the actual practice. Now, it's absolutely crucial to distinguish a community of practice from other common types of groups. Because, a lot of organizations will launch what they think is a community of practice, but actually it's just a task force. And a task force is a management-driven group designed to produce a specific outcome or a policy recommendation. Or maybe it's what we call a social learning space, which is driven purely by shared curiosity among diverse people from totally different fields. But a community of practice is distinct. It is deeply anchored in a shared practice. It's a dedicated playground for sitting with uncertainty and really navigating the messiness of your specific daily work. Let's look at how this applies directly in an educational setting, starting right at the primary level. In this really fascinating model from a Salt Lake City school, we actually see communities of practice extending way beyond just the faculty.
In this case, teachers, primary-level students, and parents all collaborated dynamically to plan learning activities together. And this brilliantly proves that learning isn't just some top-down transmission from an adult to a child. It occurs through interested collaborative participation where literally everyone's voice and experience matters. Moving up to middle and high school strategies, let's consider physical education educators. Often, a PE teacher might be the absolute only one in their building teaching that specific curriculum, which, as you can imagine, leads to pretty intense professional isolation. But by connecting geographically close middle and high schools, these educators formed a community of practice. They essentially broke down the walls of solo practice, stepping out of their individual silos to tackle shared pedagogical challenges together.
Another fantastic high school example is found among math teachers. Instead of attending some seminar on abstract pedagogical theory, they formed a COPE to share exactly what worked and, honestly, more importantly, what completely failed in their specific classrooms that week. This just perfectly demonstrates the incredible power of a living curriculum. The learning in this community is driven by real-world classroom struggles and immediate needs, rather than some predetermined list of topics handed down by the administration.
And this brilliantly illustrates how all of this theory maps directly onto formal frameworks, like the International Baccalaureate, or IB, Program Standards and Practices. For instance, Domain P emphasizes using ICT to actually build these communities. CTLP2 explicitly calls for participating in COPs to support daily practice. And then CTLP3 focuses on engaging with educators across regional boundaries. The IB actively recognizes that true, meaningful professional growth requires this deep communal engagement.
So how do these communities actually form in the first place? Well, there's a really crucial difference between cultivated COPs, which are deliberately designed and sponsored by school leadership to hit strategic goals, and emergent COPs. Emergent COPs are those organic, grassroots networks driven purely by what practitioners actually need. The ultimate example of an emergent COP is the Grassroots IB Coordinator Network. The IB organization doesn't mandate these, they form completely naturally in local areas just because coordinators desperately need that shared space to navigate the unique complexities of their roles together.
But hey, if you want to start a COPE yourself, you do need to be careful. Here are a few common mistakes leaders make. First, don't conduct a rigid needs analysis or act as a service provider where you're just delivering the solutions people ask for. Also, don't call your members attendees. They are participants. And most importantly, avoid focusing on a list of predetermined topics. As Étienne Wenger points out, predetermined topics are actually dangerous to a community. Why? Because a true COPE absolutely must be anchored in the unpredictable, daily struggle of the practice, not a rigid syllabus.
Okay, so how do we do it right? Here is Beverly Wenger Trainer's highly practical blueprint for cultivating a community from the ground up without stifling its organic energy. Step 1, find the shared passion within the domain. Step 2, talk one-on-one with practitioners to uncover what actually keeps them up at night. Step 3, facilitate a shared experience, maybe like a World Cafe format, where they can bump heads over real, tangible challenges. And Step 4, follow up to close the learning loop. You have to go back and ask, hey, did you try that idea? Did it work for you?
I absolutely love the metaphor the Wenger trainers use for launching a COP. It's exactly like a first date. I mean, you don't bring a 10-year life plan and a deep discussion about how many kids you want to a first date, right? You just focus on having a great, meaningful conversation so that there's actually a second date. The exact same goes for your first community meeting. Don't overwhelm people with rigid, long-term plans. Just give them the experience of a great learning partnership and let the desire for a second meeting happen naturally.
Now, what's really interesting here is how we measure success. So how do you actually measure if a community of practice is working? You look at the value creation loop, which is entirely driven by stories. You start with a check-in. Someone shares a specific story of an idea they tried from the last meeting. Then, you discuss the contextual details, why it worked, why it failed. Finally, you check in with a new idea to test next week. Sharing those specific contextual stories is literally the only authentic way to measure a community's true value, because it proves the learning has successfully moved from the meeting space right back into the classroom. Which brings us to our final thought for today's explainer. Are you ready to stop attending trainings and start actually engaging your uncertainty? Professional growth isn't about finding the perfect expert who has all the answers neatly packaged for you. It's about finding peers who are willing to sit in the messy, unpolished reality of the work with you and just figure it out together. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Get out there, start having those conversations, start sharing those struggles, and I'll see you next time.